Okay, so let's talk about managing the software on our labs. There are two different angles of attack here, if you will, to managing the software in our labs. Um, the two things we really need to do is we need to make sure that the piece of software we're installing on the lab shows up in the task sequence, and we also want to make sure that we've deployed it to the collection. And the reason for that is that by adding it to the task sequence, we make sure that when new machines are imaged, they come out as close to picture perfect as possible when they're done imaging. Um, and even if we're deploying a piece of software mid-semester, things happen to computers, viruses happen. We find ourselves needing to re-image a single machine randomly during the semester, and by putting the piece of software in the task sequence, we make sure that that image, the computer comes out as like the other machines as possible. The other thing that we're doing, of course, is we're deploying that piece of software to the collection. And that can look different from campus to campus, and we'll dig into that in a second here. But the reason that we do that is that this helps make the machine self-healing, if you will. It's the most important part of deploying the software, or installing the software rather, is the deployment. Because even if we put a bare machine out there, if all the deployments are set up correctly, in a matter of a day or two, that machine will be picture perfect, all on its own. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and get started. The first thing we want to do, if we want to add some software to our lab, is actually go into Confluence and say we're going to do something for UMF. We want to go into the UMF lab, and we're going to do the 24-hour lab. We're going to install SPSS 26 today. Now I've already got that in the documentation here, so I'm all set there. When the request comes in for this software, it should come in the form of a ticket, and if you label that ticket with the collection variable or the lab label, which they should always match, that ticket will show up here on the page for this lab, keeping all of the related bits about this lab under this one roof. And this is something we're really striving for. So when you get those tickets, please make sure you label the tickets, and I can show you what that looks like real quick. The label is it has to be a perfect match, but labels right there, UMF 24-hour. Okay, so that's why that shows up there. Okay, so now we've got our documentation done, and here's where I'm going to sneak in a little subtopic, and that is how to stop a piece of software from getting installed on a lab. Because I'm working in production here with live machines, I'm actually going to not want to install some random piece of software on these machines. Whoops, what am I doing? Labs, UMF. Can't talk and think at the same time. So here's our lab. This collection, let's look at the properties of it. We'll have two things that we care about. One is it's going to have a collection variable, like we're talking about here, this lab indicator, or the ticket label. It's also the collection variable. So UMF-lab, and this would be different depending on what campus you're at, is going to be 24-hour. Okay, so, oops, the other thing that we need to look at, and why we're here in the first place, is we want to see what we have for deployments on this collection. So we go over to the deployments. We can see that we have SPSS there. So we don't want to install this anymore. What this isn't going to do, okay, in order to remove that deployment, we pull up this tab, or this pane, go to this tab. We can just delete this deployment. So what this isn't going to do is this isn't going to uninstall the software. If we wanted to uninstall a piece of software from the lab, That would actually be a special kind of deployment that we're not going to cover here because it's a really advanced thing to do. It doesn't always go well, and frankly, it would be nearly impossible to document because of all of the things that have to be done. So if you need to uninstall a piece of software from your lab for whatever reason, just please reach out to EUT, send us a ticket, and we can take care of that for you. So what this will do is it'll make it so that when we uninstall that piece of software, it won't go back as part of the self-healing process. We also want to go into software library, and of course I'm already on it, but under operating systems, task sequences, UMS labs, and UMF, I want to open UMF's lab automator 2.0 task sequence, find the 24-hour lab, and remove that install step. Okay, so next time one of these machines gets imaged, there's no SPSS 26 on it. And if somebody were to go uninstall SPSS 26, it wouldn't come back. And if we deploy and uninstall, it won't come back. So we've taken care of the self-healing and we've taken care of future imaging. But now, how do we put that back? How do we make sure that SPSS 26 does get installed? So in the case of a campus like UMF, where every lab has its own software payload, for example, we'll go into this step where the variable UMF lab equals 24-hour, and we'll add a piece of software, and this one's going to be under UMS General, and just like that, next time somebody goes to image one of these machines, it'll have SPSS 26 on it. Now, it's good practice to make sure nobody's imaging when you're changing the task sequence like this. Sometimes you can get away with it. Sometimes it causes imaging to crash and you have to start all over. I tend to never risk it because that's a huge waste of time if you have to start all over again. And it just leads to a bad day, basically. So now we've taken care of future imaging. But what about the machines that are out there? We gotta, and this is a little bit more advanced, so just pay close attention to the settings that we use here. So we're gonna go to UMF 24-hour. We're gonna deploy an application. Okay, we're gonna find it in the exact same place under UMS General. But these settings drive the customer's experience. Okay, and what I mean by that is, and by the way, you shouldn't have to change anything here. All of this software should be on all of the distribution points, so you shouldn't have to worry about this. But if we left this just like this, with the defaults, that piece of software would not get installed. What would happen instead is it would show up in the software center for the end user or the customer to go install at their leisure. And we don't want to put that on our lab users. So what we do instead is we say it's a required application. So what this means is as soon as the machine realizes it has this deployment, it's going to check and see if it has that software installed yet. Okay, and because it does that, me putting SPSS 26 back on this lab isn't going to force it to reinstall on all the machines. It's going to go through that check process, see that it has SPSS 26, report back that it's already compliant, and nothing will happen. But for a machine that doesn't have SPSS 26, what would happen if I left everything the way it is now is it would start to install immediately whether a user was logged on or not, and they would see a window that says I'm installing SPSS 26. For me, that's not the ideal end user experience. That can generate help desk calls. People can get concerned that there's a virus being installed. It just kind of seems like the machine's possessed. So what we do instead, and we leave these settings just the way they are, what we do instead is we don't display it in Software Center and we don't show notifications. We hide it from Software Center and we hide all notifications. So now SPSS 26 will see that it needs to be installed on this machine. It'll start installing immediately, whether a user's logged on or not, silently. That is the goal. That is the end user experience we're looking for. And all of these settings are fine with the defaults. And just like that, we've deployed SPSS 26 to the 24-hour machines at UMF. Now, most campuses don't actually break out their payloads by labs. This is a UMF specific. I mean, there may be other campuses that do it, but UMF does this because there aren't that many machines. I mean, we're looking at 187 total, and UMF really strives to have world-class customer experience. So they work with the lab stakeholders, they ask what they want, and they try to not have anything appear on the machines that they didn't ask for, because again, that can just kind of generate confusion if you're in a geography class and you're seeing applications there for computer science class, because they're not into programming, they're into mapping. So that's the UMF approach. Let's look at a more standard approach like USM, who has a way larger fleet of computers, and for them, having a different payload for every lab would be an unbearable burden, so you can't really knock them for not taking the same approach. But what they do instead is they have a payload that is basically all of their for-pay software that students don't have access to, and they have machines that don't have to have all of the software. Maybe their classroom machines where it's mainly Word and PowerPoint presentations that happen, kiosks, just machines like that people aren't sitting down and doing hours of work on, and it's not really a machine where somebody needs to have access to that for-pay software. So all of these lab collections belong to the heavy collection. So if we go in and we look at this lab collection, what we'll see is that it has USM payload. And this is a bit of legacy here. We leave that there because maybe somebody's going to run an old task sequence and need that collection variable, but now we're working with the concept of payloads. So their task sequence is much more simple, and it really is only looking for this one payload or none at all. And the members are not individual computers driven by the machine name. That's how we fill out all of these labs. They're actually adding the labs manually to this payload collection. So why do we have these individual ones? We may need to target individual labs for specific reasons. Machines in a testing center may need to never fall asleep, or maybe we need to install a printer or have a specific customization. You never know when you're going to need to target a lab, so we try to do the work of having them all broken out as much as we can by name, and then make different collections in order to do targeted things like install this software. So if we look at USM's Automator 2.0 task sequence, you'll see that it is much more simple. There's heavy. They do have a computer science payload that gets installed on a few labs. So again, that's going to be, and this needs to be built out at this point, but that's going to be a different collection like heavy, and different labs will belong to that. So they'll get all of the software that goes into the heavy payload as well as the specialized computer science payload. And there'll be another collection for Unity. So it's a different approach, but I just wanted to show that because not everybody ascribes to UMF's one payload per lab approach.